Don't look at the door. Don't let her see you watching. That was the only thought running through my head as I stood in the hallway of St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, pretending to read a pamphlet about diabetes that I'd already read 3 times. I wasn't reading it. I was watching my son's wife walk out of my wife's room with a thermos in her hand, smiling at the nurses like she owned the floor. I didn't know yet what I was standing at the edge of. I didn't know that the next 48 hours would change everything. My family and my understanding of trust, and the way I'd look at the word love for the rest of my life. My wife's name is Loretta. We've been married for 39 years. She grew up in Sudbury, the youngest of 5 kids in a house where you earned your place at the table by being useful, and you kept it by being honest. She came to Toronto when she was 22 with 2 suitcases and a nursing certificate, and she spent the next decade working overnight shifts at Toronto Western before we met at a church potluck in Scarborough that neither of us had wanted to attend. She made a butter tart that she claimed was her grandmother's recipe. I ate 4 of them before I even learned her name. Loretta is the kind of woman who fixes things, not just broken shelves or leaking faucets. She fixes situations. She fixes people. She has a way of walking into a room and knowing exactly what it needs, and for 39 years that instinct never once steered her wrong. When our son Bryce was struggling in his 2nd year of university, it was Loretta who sat with him at the kitchen table every Sunday and worked through it with him. When my sister-in-law went through her divorce, Loretta was the one who showed up with groceries and a no-nonsense attitude and told her which lawyer to call. She does not panic. She does not spiral. She just acts. So when she started getting sick last February, I didn't know what to do with myself. Because Loretta doesn't get sick, not like this. It started with fatigue. She'd come home from her volunteer shift at the library and go straight to bed, which wasn't like her. Then came the hair. She mentioned it casually one morning, standing at the bathroom mirror, running her fingers through and showing me what came out. Too much, she said. I told her it was stress. She agreed. We moved on. By March, she was losing weight. She didn't have to lose. Her appetite was gone and her hands had started trembling. Not dramatically, just enough that she'd stopped doing her crossword puzzles in pen. She switched to pencil and didn't say a word about it, which told me everything. Loretta only goes quiet about things that scare her. Our family doctor ran blood work, then more blood work, then referred us to a specialist at Sunnybrook. The specialist ordered more tests. Every appointment ended the same way. Something is off, we're not sure what, let's look further. It was like chasing smoke. You could see something was wrong, but you couldn't grab it. Our son Bryce had married his wife 3 years earlier. Her name is Audra. She came from a family in Mississauga, father an insurance, mother who collected real estate on the side. Audra herself worked in financial planning and had the kind of put-together appearance that made you feel slightly underdressed whenever she walked into a room. I never disliked her. That's important to say. I never had a reason to. She was attentive at family dinners, she brought good wine, she asked questions and seemed to listen to the answers. Bryce was happy. That was what mattered. When Loretta got sick, Audra stepped in. She'd come by the house twice a week, sometimes more. She'd bring food, soups, casseroles in containers already labeled for the freezer. She'd sit with Loretta and talk while I ran errands. She made herself useful in the quiet, competent way she did everything, and I was grateful. I told Bryce that. I said, your wife is a good woman. He smiled like a man who already knew. I want to hold that moment now and turn it over in my hands. I want to understand how I could have been so completely wrong. It was the head nurse on Loretta's floor who came to me first. Her name was Paulette, a woman in her late 50s who'd been in that unit for over 20 years and had the kind of calm authority that you only develop after you've seen everything twice. She caught me in the hallway one afternoon in late April, after Loretta had been admitted for what the doctors were calling unspecified neurological symptoms. Paulette didn't stop walking when she spoke. She slowed down, matched my pace, and said very quietly, almost under her breath, "There's something I need to show you, and I need you not to react right now." She walked me to a small room off the main corridor, the kind of room they use for family meetings and hard conversations. She closed the door. She told me that she wasn't supposed to be doing what she was about to do, that it went outside her lane, and that if she was wrong, she'd be embarrassed, and we'd both forget this conversation ever happened. Then she told me she'd been a nurse since 1989. She'd worked in toxicology for 6 of those years before moving to general care. And she said the constellation of symptoms she was seeing in my wife, the hair loss, the weight loss, the neuropathy in her hands, the way her body was deteriorating in a pattern that didn't match any of the diagnoses they'd been chasing, was something she had seen before, not often, twice in her career. She said the word so carefully it barely made a sound. Thallium. I didn't know what that was. She explained it. A heavy metal. Historically used in rat poison in North America before it was banned in the 1970s, still available through certain industrial and laboratory channels. Colorless, tasteless, odorless when dissolved. Symptoms of chronic low-dose poisoning mirrored autoimmune disorders, thyroid conditions, neurological disease. It was missed constantly because no one looked for it unless they had a reason to look. She said, "I could be wrong, I probably am. But I need you to ask the right doctor to run the right test, and I need you to think about who has regular access to your wife." I stood in that room for a long time after she left. I thought about the soups, the casseroles in the labeled containers, the twice-weekly visits, the thermos I'd seen Audra carrying out of Loretta's room that afternoon. I want to tell you that I immediately knew that some part of me clicked into place and I saw it all clearly. But that's not true. What I felt was not clarity. What I felt was a kind of cold spreading through my chest, like ice water moving slow. Because the thing you have to understand is that this was my son's wife. This was the woman I had stood beside at their wedding at the distillery district 3 years ago and watched Bryce look at like she hung the moon. This was someone who came to our house for Christmas, who called Loretta to ask for her butter tart recipe, who had a key to our front door. I left the hospital. I drove to the Tim Hortons on Eglinton and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, which I'm not proud of. Then I called my son. I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't. Not yet. I said only that the doctors were exploring a new angle on his mother's illness, that I needed him to come to the hospital, and that I needed him to come to the hospital, and that I needed him to come alone. When Bryce arrived, he looked exhausted in the way that had been building for months. He loved his mother fiercely, and watching her decline had been grinding him down from the inside. He sat across from me in that same small room, and I watched his face while I spoke. I kept my voice level. I told him what Paulette had said. I told him what she suspected. I told him about the thallium. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, that's not possible." I said, "I know that's what it feels like." He said, "You're talking about my wife?" I said, "I know." He got up and walked out. I let him go. The next morning, I went back to the hospital and spoke to Loretta's attending physician, a quiet, serious man named Dr. Ferraro, who I'd come to trust over the previous 2 months. I didn't mention Paulette. I told him only that I'd been doing some reading, that I understood it was unusual, but that I wanted to ask whether thallium poisoning had been ruled out. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said he'd order the test. The results came back 2 days later. Thallium levels in Loretta's blood were significantly elevated, not a one-time exposure. The pattern indicated repeated, consistent low-level dosing over a period of at least 4 to 5 months. Dr. Ferraro sat me down and said the words in a tone that I will never forget, calm and measured and careful, the way you speak when you are delivering information that will break something in the person in front of you. He said, "This is not accidental." I called my son again. This time I didn't soften anything. I told him exactly what the blood work showed. I told him what the doctor had said. I told him that the police would be notified, not by me, but by the hospital, because that was the law and they had no choice. I told him that I was sorry. I was sorrier than I had words for. Bryce went quiet on the phone in a way that was different from before, not denial this time, something heavier. He said she's been asking about Mom's life insurance. He said it like he'd been holding it for a long time and finally didn't have the strength to keep it anymore. He said Audra had brought it up twice in the last 2 months. The policy Loretta and I had carried for 25 years, a joint policy through Sun Life. Substantial enough that it had seemed responsible when we signed it, and now felt like a target drawn on Loretta's chest. He said he'd thought it was just Audra being practical. Planning ahead, being the financial planner she was. He said he hadn't wanted to think about what else it might mean. The Toronto Police Service assigned a detective named Croft to the case. She was methodical, quiet, and asked very good questions. She interviewed me twice at the station on College Street before asking to speak with Bryce separately. I don't know everything that happened in that room. Bryce doesn't talk about it much even now. But I know that what he told her was honest, and I know it cost him. At Detective Croft's direction, we did not change anything about the access Audra had to our home. We did not tell her the test results. We did not change the locks or the routine. I want to be honest about how difficult that was. Loretta was still in hospital. Audra was still coming to visit. I sat across from her in the hospital cafeteria one afternoon and watched her stir her coffee and asked me how I was holding up. And I said, fine, just tired, you know how it is. I have never in my life worked harder to keep my face still. The investigation moved quickly once it had direction. Detective Croft obtained a warrant. They tested residue from containers found in our kitchen, including 2 soup containers from Loretta's side of the refrigerator that Audra had brought the previous week. They found thallium compound consistent with what was in Loretta's blood work. They arrested Audra on a Thursday morning at the house she and Bryce shared in Etobicoke. I wasn't there. Bryce was. He called me afterward, and I could tell he'd been crying, though he didn't say so. He said, I had no idea, Dad. I need you to know that. I told him I knew. I told him I'd never doubted it for a second. There was a preliminary hearing, and then several months later, a trial. Audra pleaded not guilty. The Crown's case rested on the toxicology, the financial motive. She had, it emerged, quietly removed herself as a beneficiary from certain accounts and restructured others in ways that would have benefited only her if Loretta passed, and a text message she had sent to an acquaintance 8 weeks before Loretta was admitted, asking in very careful language about the availability of certain laboratory chemicals. It wasn't careful enough. She was convicted of administering a noxious substance with intent to endanger life. The judge's remarks at sentencing were long and precise and left no ambiguity about what she had done or what the court thought of it. Audra received a 6-year federal sentence and was remanded to Grand Valley Institution for Women. My son filed for divorce the week after the conviction. He didn't waver on it. That surprised some people, I think. They expected more conflict, more back and forth, more of the complicated loyalty that marriage tends to create, even after everything. But Bryce is Loretta's son in the way that matters. He knows what honesty requires of you, even when it's expensive. Loretta is home now. The recovery has been slow. Thallium poisoning is not something your body forgives quickly or completely. She still has some nerve sensitivity in her hands, and she tires more easily than she used to. But she is home. She is doing her crossword puzzles in pen again, which is the barometer I use. When I saw that, the pen back in her hand, the newspaper folded the way she's always folded it, I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a few minutes and didn't trust myself to speak. She knows everything. I told her when the doctor said she was well enough to hear it, she listened to all of it without interrupting, which is not like her. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I always thought she was trying too hard. I said, what do you mean? She said, the soups, the visits. Nobody does that much without wanting something. I thought she was just trying to impress you. I wish I'd been wrong about it differently. That was the thing that stayed with me. Not the trial, not the conviction, not even the night I sat in that hospital parking lot and tried to understand what I was being asked to believe. It was Loretta in our kitchen 6 months after nearly dying, telling me she'd noticed something wasn't right and had written it off as politeness. We talk to our kids about strangers. We warn them about people they don't know. We arm them against the threat that comes from outside the house. Nobody tells you to watch the door you already opened. Nobody tells you that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who has a key, who knows the routine, who knows what you keep in the fridge and what you take in your tea and what is written on your insurance papers. Nobody tells you because it is too terrible to prepare for. Because if you prepared for it, you would never let anyone in at all. But I'll tell you this. A few months after Loretta came home, Bryce came over for Sunday dinner. He helped her in the kitchen, which she always does, and the two of them stood at the counter arguing cheerfully about whether butter tarts need raisins. Loretta says yes, Bryce says never. This is a debate they have had his entire life, and I sat at the kitchen table and listened to them and thought, we still have this. After everything, we still have this. That is not nothing, that is, in fact, everything. If something in your gut is telling you something isn't right, with a person, with a situation, with a pattern you can't quite name, please don't talk yourself out of it the way I almost did. You are not being paranoid. You are not being ungrateful. You are not imagining things. Sometimes the thing you're sensing is real, and the people you love are counting on you to pay attention. I keep coming back to something Paulette said to me in that small room off the corridor, that she almost didn't say anything, that she'd talked herself out of it twice before she caught me in the hallway. She said, I've been wrong before, and being wrong about something like this costs people. I almost stayed quiet. I'm glad she didn't, and I've been thinking about what it took for her to speak up. Not just the knowledge, though she had that, 20 years of it, pattern recognition built from thousands of patients and late shifts and hard conversations. It was something underneath the knowledge. It was the willingness to act on what she saw even when acting was uncomfortable, even when it risked her being embarrassed or overstepping. That kind of courage is quieter than people expect. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the hallway and says, there's something I need to show you. What happened to Loretta was the result of a choice Audra made, not once, not in a moment of weakness, but repeatedly, deliberately, over months. Every container of soup she brought to our house was a choice. Every visit, every careful smile, every question about insurance was a choice. There is no way to soften that or find a reason underneath it that makes it less than what it was. Greed has a way of hollowing a person out until the only thing left is the calculation. I don't know when that happened to Audra. I don't know what she told herself. But I know that when you let what you want override what is right, not once, but as a practice, as a way of living, it compounds, it builds, and eventually it becomes something that a toxicology report can measure. Bryce knew something was off before he let himself know it. He told me that after the trial. He said the insurance questions had felt wrong, but he hadn't wanted to follow the feeling to where it led. I understand that. It is very human to protect yourself from conclusions that are too painful to reach. But I think about what it cost him to stay in that not knowing. The weight of it, the low-level dread he must have been carrying without a name for it. And I think about what it took for him, once the truth was out, to act on it cleanly, to tell Detective Croft everything, to file the papers without wavering. That wasn't easy. That was a man deciding at significant personal cost that honesty mattered more than comfort. I am more proud of my son for that than for anything else he has done in his life. Loretta is the one who puts a pen back in her hand. That is how I measure her. Not by the medical reports, not by what the doctors say at her follow-up appointments, but by that she went through something that would have defeated a lot of people. Not just the illness, but the meaning of it, the knowledge of who had done it and why. She had to hold that. She held it, and she kept going. That is not stubbornness. That is something deeper. That is a person who has decided on some fundamental level that life is worth the effort of continuing to live it well. I think about these three things now when something hard comes up. Do I have the integrity to act on what I know is right, even when it costs me? Do I have the clarity to read a situation honestly without letting what I want to be true get in the way of what is true? And do I have the steadiness to keep going after something breaks, not to pretend it didn't happen, but to keep going anyway? I don't always get there, but I know what I'm aiming for.